Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Jessie Lezak, CMO at BDEX, along with co-host David Finkelstein, BDEX's co-founder and CEO. Bring him in here. Hey, David, how's it going back in Sanibel?
It's going. So the good news is we have power and Wi-Fi, so I'm able to be here for the first time in 6 weeks and actually broadcast live here for the first time. So excited.
Well, I'm grateful for that. So glad to have you back. And just noticed, I uploaded a video prior to our pre-show, and we've kind of switched around our topics in the pre-show for the better, thanks to Annmarie's input. So, for those of you that are watching live and saw that video, podcast listeners don't even see that, but you're going to see us switching up those topics and getting into some different ones. But today's guest is Annmarie Turpin, Senior Vice President, going to bring her in here, of Client Analytics at Ocean Media. Annmarie leads Ocean Media's data analytics, performance measurement, and technological development initiatives, with a keen focus on preserving the integrity of analytics and a passion for strategically leveraging data. Annmarie has forged Ocean's path since 2009. Thank you so much for being here with us, Annmarie. Could you please start from the beginning and tell us your story? And also, could you please tell listeners a little about Ocean Media and how you help people there?
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. I'm so happy to be here. So a little bit about my path to here. I guess I've always had a passion for analysis. So I studied criminology, psychology, and demography in school. And then I started forging a career doing analysis in whatever industry I was interested in. It was less important about the industry and more about doing data analysis. So I started as a crime analyst, then I did some real estate consulting, and then I found my way to advertising by joining Ocean Media 14 years ago. When I joined, we were about 30 people, and our particular niche in the agency world was media accountability through measurement. So I've kind of found my analysis outlet. At the time, we were starting to build proprietary measurement tools, and that was a catalyst for our growth over the next 5 to 7 years. And since then, we've continued to expand our tech stack and build out measurement capabilities beyond linear television, but into nonlinear TV, OTT streaming audio, podcasts, etc. So Ocean Media is a media planning and buying agency. And today we're nearly 200 people deep. And even though measurement and analytics aren't as niche today as they were maybe a decade ago or over a decade ago when I joined, we still see our level of analytical rigor and technical capabilities to be still quite uncommon in the agency space. So it's a point of pride for us and an area of focus for me and my team.
That's awesome. Thanks for being here, Annmarie. That's a great introduction and really interesting background that you have there. So that's pretty cool. We have a few topics that we want to talk about, but I think one of the things that we also wanted to get into was Twitter, because it's been making a lot of noise lately, obviously. And we're curious, with your experience in working with advertisers, how you think that will impact the changes that they're making will impact advertisers directly.
Yeah, it's been quite a few weeks, hasn't it? I think from our perspective and in behalf of our brands, the way we think that they're thinking about it is it's really all about brand safety. Brands are really sensitive about the content their messages run adjacent to, because sometimes adjacency can be misconstrued with advocacy. And so they want to make sure that the content that they're adjacent to is safe for their brand and represents what their brand stands for. To date, content moderation on Twitter has been a known entity. And so a risk that brands that are on the platform now are willing to take on. With the new ownership, it appears that the capabilities of the existing content moderation are being exceeded. A lot more sort of hate speech out there, a lot that's getting through. And then there's also a mixed message about, on the one hand, we're saying freedom of speech and less content moderation. And then on the other hand, it seems like content is being banned because of what it's promoting, like spoof accounts and things like that. So it's really unclear for advertisers what kind of content is going to be supported on the platform, and therefore what their risk exposure is going to be. So a lot of advertisers have pulled their dollars or are just waiting on the sidelines until they have a better sense for what content will be permitted and what the risk will be for them. So that's sort of on the content side. I think from a platform health standpoint, the user growth is a little bit stagnated. The engagement seems to be waning, and that could worsen or improve depending on what Musk decides to enact. So I think a lot of advertisers now are just feeling like there's other outlets that are safer for their brands, that are more healthy from a user growth standpoint or engagement standpoint. And so some of those dollars are being sort of redirected to those platforms until the potential for this change reveals itself.
Yeah, those are good points. I also think that, interestingly enough, Elon Musk hasn't really fully attacked the bot activity yet, and how they're going to deal with that and reduce it. I don't think the blue check mark is going to do it. There needs to be a lot more done in order to fully detect what is real, what is a human activity, action, and what is bot activity. And I think that has a lot of effect on advertisers as well, because, if you're paying for your advertisements, to be seen, you want to know that they're being seen by real people. Right?
Definitely. I mean, anytime that fraud is a concern or a potential, antennas go up. And that hasn't always been the case with Twitter, but that sort of bot issue conflating with the brand safety thing is just a recipe for wait and see, or, let's invest somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's true. And there's a lot of wait and see going on right now. Yeah.
For now, I think I'm going to wait and see. I don't think I'll be spending $8 on Twitter just yet. Although I was thinking about maybe we should think about that for BDEX. I don't know.
And honestly, I don't think that will affect the bot traffic, because bots are making, people are making a lot more money than $8 a month off of their bots. So, it actually pays to pay for that, even if you're an individual or an organization that's generating bot traffic. So I don't think that's going to stop anything.
Definitely. Well, shall we move into this next topic here? David, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I know that we talked a little bit about this ahead of time, and I think that, what's really interesting is just, your experience in doing analysis on ad campaigns and attribution. I think we'd really love, and I think our listeners would really love to learn a little more about your experience there, modeling versus attribution. I think there's the listeners have a lot to gain from learning from your experience there. So I personally, this is not something that I'm involved in heavily, besides sort of the data side of the analytics, but would love to, learn from you there. I think that's your expertise. So I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Several topics that are near and dear to my heart. It seems these days that, or over the past, at least the course of my career in advertising and advertising measurement, media mix modeling and multi-touch attribution tend to ebb and flow in terms of popularity. And so as one comes into favor, the other seems to go out of favor. It seems these days, media mix modeling is coming more into favor. And it's certainly something that we've been leveraging a lot as a capability that we're offering to our advertisers. That answers one of the biggest burning questions for them, which is, where should I spend my next dollar? Or at least is a contribution to answering that question. And so perhaps maybe just making a quick distinction between what is MMM and MTA. I tend to sort of describe them as a media mix model is sort of a top-down approach to understanding attribution, where multi-touch attribution is more bottom-up. And what I mean by that, top-down sort of takes a whole, like your entire sort of customer base, and tries to divide it up and give credit to the different channels that drove it. So starts with the whole and divides it up. And in the MTA case, or a bottom-up case, it takes the individual pieces and builds up to the total. Both approaches use statistical principles and data science. On the MMM side, you're really looking sort of more at regression, and it's running thousands of permutations on the data set to sort of narrow in on the contribution of each input to the total customer base. On the MTA side, you're using more like Monte Carlo simulations or Bayes analysis to take the individual customer level, user level data and their path to conversion, and understand which touch points within the path to conversion are most influential on the conversion event, and therefore assigns credit based on the measured value of each of those touch points. So the MTA is sort of going micro to macro and MMM macro to micro. Each of them have, their pros and cons. When we think about the vices and virtues of each, we really evaluate them based on data, the precision, and sort of the maintenance, or how much resources does it take to stand it up and maintain it. On the data side, the MMM is a much lighter lift. Sure, you have to have a lot of data, historical data in terms of the inputs. How much money are you spending, or how many impressions are you putting into your marketing by channel or by segment that you want to measure. And that can take some time to gather, but you really sort of gather it once and maintain it over time. On the MTA side, getting the user level clickstream data and their path to conversion can be a really huge lift. Getting it, storing it, keeping it up to date. And certainly that's very vulnerable these days to a lot of the signal loss that we're seeing with tracking and privacy. So kind of point towards, I think, media mix modeling on the data side. From a precision and granularity standpoint, I think the perception is that MTA is much more precise because you are looking at user level touch points. And I think where you do have signal, that is true. But there's a lot of places you don't have signal. In particular, linear television is difficult to get signal on. Also, these walled gardens like Facebook, where they're not sharing clickstream data or user level data. So these end up being sort of blind spots in the MTA. And if you don't have the entirety of the picture, you don't know kind of what mistakes or misattribution could be taking place. And then the maintenance and resources. Well, both require resources and a fair amount of time and investment. An MMM is much lighter, where an MTA is something that sort of needs to be maintained and also has a lot of compute power to it. So you're running it frequently. It takes a lot of CPU. And then when you start to lose its signal, you kind of have to rebuild your model, retrain. It's just a lot. So it seems, given where we're kind of headed with privacy and where the market tends to be right now in terms of its interests, it seems to be favoring media mix modeling, and we've had a lot of success with that lately. One of the drawbacks of media mix modeling, though, is you don't always get a signal for every input that you put into the model. So if it's a small channel or something you're testing into, the media mix model may not pick it up. So you'll still have blind spots with media mix modeling, and that's why it's one piece of an overall sort of holistic measurement approach. That was a lot, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely see the challenge going forward on the MTA side with all of the changes that have gone on around privacy and data tracking. And so that's sort of getting in the way of being able to do that. Do you currently, do you typically partner with someone on the identity side to handle that attribution, to be able to make those connections between where those different touch points happen for any individual sort of conversion or whatever it is that you're following, or are you relying on the data that's coming in from the ad servers themselves?
It depends. So I assume your question's associated with MTA. That makes sense. Yeah. We ourselves, Ocean Media, hasn't stood up an MTA solution for our brands yet, but we've been party to companies that are doing that. To answer your question, a lot of those signals are coming from the platforms or from their device graphs and what they're able to pass to us. And then there's still, like in the case of linear television, there are some solutions out there that are using ACR data to help track users or individuals at a user level, which is an interesting input to be able to put into an MTA, and I think strengthens it quite a lot. But because ACR is limited to smart televisions and the panel is smaller, you're looking at really a sample of linear television. So that's going to be sort of the constraint for your entire model, is building your MTA based on the size of the panel that ACR represents. And then you still don't have a solve for Facebook and other walled gardens.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, some of the challenges. Go ahead, Jesse.
I was just going to say, I didn't see first touch attribution on here. I know in the P2P world, especially with HubSpot, that's something that people will go in between. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. One great thing about MTA, so it's one thing to be able to sort of look at all of the touch points. And an MTA model will sort of say, regardless of it won't have to say you have to do first touch or you have to do last touch. What an MTA will do is weight the touch points. And it could be that, podcast falls in the middle of a conversion path. So it's not first or last, but conversion paths that include podcast will have a higher likelihood or higher probability of becoming a converter. And it allows podcast to, in this particular instance, to get a lot of credit where a first or a last touch model wouldn't allow. So that's certainly one of the cool things, depending on how you do your MTA, that MTA allows. And of course, media mix modeling doesn't care about touch because it's not looking at that conversion path. It's sort of just looking, when I increase my presence of a particular stimulus, do I see that have an impact on an outcome? And it'll do that thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And if it's consistent, then it'll give that channel credit. And it doesn't matter if it's, where it fell in a click stream or how many touch points it had.
I don't know if you guys noticed, but Mark Mack had a comment, GA4 changed everything. Did anyone have any thoughts on that when he was saying that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm talking about a little bit is just the MTA relies on so much data and a certain type of data that you're at the mercy of where you're getting that data. And if somebody like Google decides to make a change, if you've invested all of this time and resources to get the data to build a particular type of model, that can be all undone by a decision totally out of your control. That's my take on it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right. Well, shall we transition into the experimentation as a key ingredient to measuring marketing performance? What were your thoughts there, Annmarie? I'm sorry.
So I mentioned, on the media mix model side or even on the MTA side, you're going to have blind spots. And so if you rely on either of those as your sole source for where you should spend your next dollar, you're going to be missing some opportunities for learning. And I think that's where experimentation comes in. So experimentation can fill in gaps where you don't have signal from your attribution approach, but it also can be used to cross-validate. So you may get a signal from an MMM that says this particular channel is incredibly efficient and you should be more deeply invested there. Such a hypothesis could be put into an experiment in which you have, say, a test versus a control, and you expose one group to that stimulus and you compare their response or their behavior to a control group that wasn't exposed. We like to do lots of expose versus control testing. You can do it locally on a geo side. You can do ghost bidding. You can serve PSAs as your sort of control. So there's a lot of ways to get clever with it, but it allows you to sort of richen the observations that you have. Because I think overall, attribution is the key question that a lot of marketers have. But the expectation often on marketers' part is that there is a single way of doing that. And I think one thing we try and communicate to our brands and partners is that if you want to understand attribution, you really need to come at it from a lot of different angles. Do an MTA, do an MMM, and then do some experimentation and see where all of these things point. Ensemble these inputs and then come up with a POV and then continue testing ongoing. Another way of testing that we also do is sort of A/B testing. So this is more sort of like on the creative side or on an audience side where you can compare like groups that receive different treatments. So we're big fans of testing as an important part of overall holistic measurement and understanding.
Yeah, that's it's an important thing, especially when you're talking about, we're always recommending that to our customers with respect to when they're using third-party data, because no one really knows where that data is coming from in many cases. And so we've seen a lot of really sort of poor data sets that people are relying on. And so we're always recommending to them to do different types of experimentations or A/B testing against different data sets that they're using to target their campaigns so that they can understand truly what is working and what's not working. Because a lot of times companies get so reliant on these third-party data sets and they use it, and then they just sort of accept the sort of performance that they get and get sort of complacent there. And so we're always pushing our clients to not be complacent, to always look for something better and do those experimentations and testing to make sure that they can really dig deep and find what works best for them.
Yeah, and I think, platform reporting, a lot of brands are relying on platform reporting to sort of be their input on how well something's doing. So Facebook will measure its own performance and it'll give you an output, and you could compare that to YouTube per se. And one of the big, I think, mistakes is comparing what Facebook reports for itself versus what YouTube reports for itself. Because they have different methodologies that they're bringing to the table in their measurement. And they're also not taking into account cross-channel impacts. And so it's really just fairly siloed. So when you go in, you can have these inputs and sort of have a hypothesis. Okay, Facebook's reporting a better cost per than YouTube is. Let's go and test that in a local market situation. And so you can do it fairly inexpensively. And there's a couple of really cool packages out there that marketers can use if they have an analytics or data science team. We've used Geo Experiments that Google's put out. GeoLift was also put out by Facebook. That's a really good one. And it helps you do the market stratification. There's some customizability, and also helps with the measurement, building the expected or the counterfactual and measuring lift versus that. So it's maybe sounds intimidating and quite an undertaking, but once you have an understanding for it, it can really be an always on strategy where you're kind of always in a state of learning and testing without having to disrupt your BAU marketing strategy.
Yeah, one of the things that we noticed with Facebook working with some of our clients is that when you're using third-party data sets, Facebook has the system rigged. They automatically frequency cap their campaigns when you're using their data, but when you use a third-party data set, they don't allow any frequency capping. And so what happens is you end up, you're comparing apples to oranges, because you're running one campaign with a third-party data set that they'll run 10 or 15 impressions on, and then they'll take theirs and they'll only run 2 or 3 impressions on it. And so now all of a sudden, theirs looks like it converts better when if they were to cap, the conversions equally on the third-party data set, then it would have performed much better. And so it's, they just set it up to make themselves win.
That is a very cool sort of premise for a design for a local test. So sort of pick one cell that would be exposed to Facebook's sort of native ad or native way of buying, and another one that would be just given the third party. And then you can actually measure lift versus control for each of those cells and cross-validate that with what Facebook is reporting. I would love to do something like that.
Let's do it. I was like, much good.
I just may.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if that transitions well into the third topic, David, tools. And, we've been busy with our OmniIQ launch, which was one of the reasons I was slow with email. But David, do you want to introduce this topic?
Yeah, I mean, look, we talked about this early on. I think that there are different tools for optimizing performance and different tools for measuring performance. You obviously have more experience on the campaign side. We're on the data side. So love to kind of get your input on what tools you use for each of these. And I think it's really valuable for our listeners also.
Yeah, I think the Facebook instance that you brought is a really nice sort of transition and helps me amplify the point that I was making previously, where if you sort of look at the way Facebook would measure their own media or their own campaigns and YouTube's, they come at it with different methodologies, and they're not looking at cross-channel, and there's some drawbacks. So rather than using the platforms for attribution, we rely on the platforms to sort of measure the directionality of the different strategies that we're leveraging. In the case that you described, David, where Facebook's sort of sandbagging the other audience, this becomes less true and therefore a risk. But the sort of underlying assumption is when you have a platform that's measuring its own performance and it's giving everybody a fair shake, then it's, in terms of what's available to be purchased, then you can use the platform, which is flawed in terms of the total amount of credit that it's giving to itself, because it's not taking into account other platforms. But within that, if you assume that error is distributed evenly across the audiences that you're targeting or the creatives that you're flighting, then you can say, creative A is better than creative B, or this audience is better than that audience, and make optimizations within the campaign. And then once those optimizations are made, then you go back to your testing strategy or your MMM or your MTA, and see if I made those optimizations within the channel using the platform performance, can I see the result of the improvement of those platforms within my MTA or those channels within my MTA or MMM. So it feels a little bit semantical to sort of say, optimization versus measurement. When I say measurement, I'm really meaning attribution and sort of channel efficacy, versus optimization being within the channel, what are the right strategies for making that channel work harder, work better, and be more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't have any additional thoughts there. Do you, David?
No, just I think that, again, always looking at it from the data side, we're always trying to help our customers figure out, how to properly measure their performance. Because like you said, if you're running multiple campaigns on different platforms, each one is going to take credit for conversions that are occurring. And so a lot of times what happens is if you try to look at all of the different data that you're using or the reporting that you're getting, you're seeing that maybe you've got 100 conversions, but one platform is saying that they've got 100 and the other platform is saying they've got 100, but you really only had 100 because they're both taking credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's always the challenge. And so, we're always trying to help our customers figure out what tools they should be using externally to measure these things, because the platforms are always contradictory to each other. And when you're, like you said, when you're using multiple different platforms, it can be challenging like that.
Yeah, exactly. One other thing that you could sort of add to this, there's a mashup you can do between using the platform optimization and also testing. Some of the platforms allow ghost bidding. And so by ghost bidding, for those that are the unindoctrinated, you sort of enter the auction as though you're going to commit to paying that impression. And then at the last minute, you pull out. And so the algorithm is saying, yes, this is an eligible person based on the criteria that you've set for your target. But we're going to pull out of the auction at the last minute and hold that person aside as an unexposed, and then expose someone else and then compare control exposed. And you can do that within the platform at an audience level or creative level. So if you're not trusting of the premise that the error in the platform measurement is distributed evenly across the two groups that you're comparing or several groups that you're comparing, then you can look at it from an incrementality standpoint by looking at exposed versus unexposed and see if that gives you a different signal. So it's kind of a clever way of getting even more precise by using the platforms for optimizing and introducing some testing scenarios.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Betsy, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. If you don't mind, we'd love to hear some of your favorite tools, Annmarie. We ask our guests to share some of their favorites, and then we'll put it in the comments. So if you could share your top 5 or maybe 3, what would those be?
Yeah, I can. I smile because I don't think I'm going to have some, very nuanced, like clever, like unknown tech tool that I use. The tools that we use to make us successful are your standard. So Tableau is a great tool for us for data visualization and analysis, particularly in the big data sets that we're running. We also have a lot of Tableau dashboards that help us both internally from an agency standpoint and also report to clients. So that's an important tool. Microsoft Teams is so well integrated with all of the things that we do from an agency perspective. And for me and work from home and with young kids, I can go phone to desktop and seamlessly. And so I love that tool. A lesser known tool perhaps that I've used in the past for organization is Trello. I like it. It sort of helps me organize different projects and different stages in projects and allows for cross collaboration, which is pretty common among lots of tools, and there's lots of options out there. I like Evernote for note taking and for sort of passwords and things like that. So I guess that's 4.
Yeah, those are good ones.
Yeah, that's a good list. I used to use Trello a long time ago. I haven't kept up with it.
It does require a commitment, I think.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, I used to use it really early on, so I'm sure by now they've got a lot more tools to it. But Tableau is an interesting one because we used to use Tableau and we switched to QuickSight, which is an AWS product. because everything we do is on AWS, and it just made it easier.
Yeah,
But it's very similar.
yeah. Sometimes your tech stack determines where you're going to invest from a, and so since all of the databases that we use for dashboarding, we are all either on premise or within sort of our environment. So it allows us to really create a custom and tailored experience for doing all that. I guess I should also add, we have been playing a little bit with Snowflake, particularly Snowflake as a means to connecting with and getting around some of the data privacy issues, Snowflake for clean rooms. So that's, I think, still emerging how we're going to use clean rooms and still protect people's privacy and things like that, but still get the targeting underway. And so Snowflake's been a pretty cool tool to allow us to explore clean rooms a little bit.
Yeah, we work with them as well.
Very interesting. Yeah. So I put that one in there as well for anyone who's watching live. But yeah, we are partners with Snowflake, so always glad to hear that one. And we have a data clean room in OmniIQ. Do you want to talk about that at all, David, since data clean rooms came up?
Yeah, I mean, we have a new product launch coming. So we do have data clean room in our current OmniIQ version, but we have an enhanced version coming up, and there it is. And there's a lot of new features coming. So one, being able to match your data to a lot of other third-party data to enhance it, building audiences off of it, using our proprietary machine learning algorithm platform to build audiences off of that. So going back to talking about how using data and first-party data is something that we're always talking about, and helping customers leverage their own first-party data. That's what we do with OmniIQ, and helping people essentially reach the right people by building audiences using their first-party data.
Absolutely. So since we still have some time and we did get through all of our topics, we have these questions that we repeat each time that are just kind of staple to the show. And so I guess we have a few minutes. I'll get into some of those. They were at the bottom of the script if you had time to see any of those. But David, feel free to jump in if there's any of them that you want to choose. But I'm going to jump to some of the ones, just about you, Annmarie. So if you could go back to when you first came into the industry, what is the number one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Oh, great question. And I did read the script, so you think I'd be better prepared with like this single piece of advice that I would offer. I think probably the thing that has taken me the longest to sort of, or been the biggest area of improvement along my career, which if I guess I had figured out earlier would have made life a little easier, was, using data to tell stories and sort of seeing insights in data. For an analyst seems like it should be, very clear about how that data should sort of factor into the decision-making process. And it took me a long time to sort of see there's a lot of competing priorities, and data is one input. And so, integrating data into the decision-making process, and being patient with, sometimes that'll have a lot of influence, sometimes it's lesser. How to advocate for data in a way that's not alienating, that helps people understand. So I think that, some patience there, some sort of understanding, and a little bit of a sort of having a broader view would probably be some advice I give to my earlier self, but without letting up.
That's good. And actually, the one that I'll do is sort of goes off of that one, which is thinking back at the lessons that you've learned along the way from your past, whether it be past jobs or your current, current work that you're doing. What sort of advice would you give to everyone else that's listening to say, here's what I've learned, and this is what I would want to share with you so that you can learn from it?
Yeah, I think another key element of success that I think the data community at large could benefit from is the idea of sort of bringing people along. I think data and analytics can sometimes be intimidating to those who are outside of the space. And so it can be when you get to sort of further down the line and you have a conclusion and a direction you want to head. If you haven't brought people along, it's harder to get buy-in and adoption. But if you bring people along, it sort of disarms the topic, makes people more comfortable with it, and becomes less of a barrier for getting buy-in and sort of getting people on board to data-driven solutions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Absolutely. And did you guys see, we got a question in from David Wellborn. What do you use for modeling?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have built our own custom media mix models in TensorFlow. And so we've used that before, but also we've just come upon Facebook published a Robin package for media mix modeling that has a nice framework for us to work within to sort of put in our own judgment or our own approach, but also be transparent with that. I think as an agency, one of our biggest challenges or barriers to overcome is the perception of objectivity, because we do steward media. And so when we're in the position of measuring the media that we steward, it can be perceived that we're not partial. And so with a package like Robin that's open source, it allows us to communicate with those who are interested about all the assumptions we're making, the inputs, all the different ways that the media mix model could go. I think one of the criticisms of media mix modeling is that it's as much art as it is science, and you could give a media mix model assignment to multiple people and get lots of different outcomes, and that makes people uncomfortable. And I think one way through that is to be transparent and be collaborative through the process. And because there's a lot that you can do with a media mix model, and you want everyone to be comfortable with the assumptions that were made so they're comfortable with the outcome that they're receiving.
That's a good point. And Warren was cheering you on there. Spot on, Annmarie, he was saying. But I guess we have a couple more minutes. So I'm going to ask, what secrets, tips, and tricks can you share that will help prepare advertisers for the future of data in advertising? And I guess I should have prefaced that with, we talk a lot about first-party data, especially with cookie deprecation and, of course, Google delayed again. But, at BDEX, we help people optimize or use their first-party customer data to understand who their buyers are and to go find more like them. So, with all of that in mind, what would you advise advertisers about how to prepare for the future?
Yep. So first-party data is obviously an important part of the puzzle going forward if we're going to be going away from a pixel solution. And that's not exactly a hot take. But I think the investment that advertisers make on the front end when they set up campaigns to make sure that they're enabling a path for that first-party data is an area of emphasis for us lately. So things like passing dynamic parameters, making sure like order IDs are available and things like that at the setup of a campaign allows, even if you're not in a position to use that data right away, if you've just set it up so that you can collect the information, then you're not in a position 6 months down the road where it's like, oh gosh, if we had only that data, let's start today. So, working with their third-party tools to make sure that the data, that they're passing the right signals through the data stream is an important part to making sure that first-party data is actually going to be usable.
Good point. Tess, you unmute again.
Anything else you would add before we wrap up, David?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
Yeah, this has all been really great, Annmarie. We really appreciate your time. And I guess in closing here, we would like, if you find the Deconstructing Data podcast interesting, you might like checking out BDEX's OmniIQ, as David was mentioning earlier. I can go ahead and put that QR code back up here. We do have a launch coming up soon. David, is there anything you might want to give listeners, like any sort of sneak peek of what might be happening in the next, I guess, week with OmniIQ?
I think the big thing that we want to make known is that the idea of this new launch is to help SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, be more competitive in their advertising and data solutions. than they have been able to before. I think the biggest thing that we found in actually through this podcast and talking to a lot of marketers is we've found that a lot of them have found it's very difficult for them to compete with these big tech companies and these walled gardens and the limitations of data that's available to them because of these things. And so the new product launch is designed to help small and medium-sized businesses as advertisers and marketing and advertising agencies that are helping them gain more insights about their own customers, as well as reach more customers like the people that they're trying to reach. And so making those tools more available, that's the key for us going forward.
Absolutely. Yep. I'm excited about it. So that's going to be coming out here very soon. But for now, you can just create your account, simply upload a CSV file of your first party customer data and see complimentary analytics. It does all that and more. So if you check it out, be sure to share some feedback. It's new and being molded by our customer feedback. So we want to hear from you. And we'd love to hear from listeners about deconstructing data. Please share all your qualitative data with us. Anything else you'd like to add, David? And Annmarie, thanks again for coming in. I think our listeners definitely appreciated everything you were saying.
That was fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to go ahead and close it out, but feel free to stick on and we can say goodbye here in just a moment. All right. Well, thanks to all of our listeners. I'm going to play our outro video.